The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was a place of pride for alien leaders from across the stars, a place where they believed all disputes could be solved through calm words and long speeches, a place where power was measured in politics, not in weapons. But today, the hall did not feel like a place of peace. Today, it felt like a trap. Bright banners of alien worlds hung from the high ceiling. The light from the giant crystal roof poured down in streams of blue and gold. Strange flowers from distant planets filled the air with a sweet scent, and the polished black floor reflected the faces of the many species standing around the circle. Each alien leader stood with guards by their side, some with scales, some with fur, some with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark, all of them focused on the single figure in the center of the room. Ambassador John Hale was a tall man with sharp eyes and calm shoulders. Even now chained to a tall steel post, he stood as if he still represented all of humanity. His uniform was torn at the sleeve, and a long cut ran across his cheek, but his head was high. He had walked into this hall, believing he would speak for peace, and now he stood surrounded by those who wanted him dead. The council speaker, an old alien with skin like cracked stone, raised its long fingers to quiet the hall. The voices of the alien leaders fell into silence. The sound of boots echoed as guard from the Rhineth Empire stepped forward. Their armor was dark red, their helmets shaped like the jaws of some predator from their homeworld. In their hands, they carried long silver spears that hissed faintly at the tip. One guard carried a metal container. The smell of sharp oil spread through the air. Several alien leaders shifted uncomfortably, but none stepped forward. The guard walked slowly around Hale, pouring the thick liquid over him. The dark oil soaked into his torn uniform, dripping down to the polished floor. Hale closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deep. Then he opened them and locked his gaze on the speaker. The speaker's voice was slow and cold. The words echoed off the crystal roof. The human is found guilty of crimes against the unity of the galaxy, for the expansion of his species, for the disrespect of alien law, for the insult to our council. We pass the sentence of death by flame. Murmurs moved through the crowd, some in agreement, some in unease, but none dared speak against it. The guards stepped back, leaving the human glistening under the hall's cold lights. The air was heavy and still as one guard lifted a torch, its tip burning with a small blue fire. The sound of it crackling was the only sound in the hall. Hale's voice broke the silence. It was not the voice of a man begging for life. It was the voice of a man who had already accepted his fate. He said, "You think this will break us. You think this will make humans bow. But you are wrong. Humanity does not bow. Humanity does not forget, and humanity does not forgive." The guard stepped forward and pressed the blue flame to the oil. In an instant, the fire roared up around Hale, wrapping his body in orange and gold heat. Waves rolled out from the post. The smell of burning cloth filled the air. Some alien leaders turned away, but others watched with cold eyes. Hale's face twisted in pain, yet he forced his head up. His voice carried over the roar of the fire. His last words were for every human watching somewhere in the stars. Tell them we remember. Tell them we will come for them. The council chamber was silent except for the sound of the burning. When his voice stopped, when his body went still, the guards stepped back. The flames still crackled, but their work was done. A signal was sent, and across the galaxy, every major news channel, every military outpost, and every civilian network received the live broadcast. The death of the human diplomat had been shown to billions in real time. On Earth, the feed played in the central hall of the United Human Fleet. Officers stood frozen, some with fists clenched so tight their knuckles were white. No one spoke, no one moved. They only watched as the flames on the screen died away. In the deep colonies near the edge of human space, miners stopped their work and stared at the image on their screens. Parents pulled their children close. Soldiers and outposts far from home felt something inside them shift. It was not just anger, it was something deeper. The broadcast cut out. The screen turned black, and the silence that followed it felt as if the entire human race was holding its breath. There was no sound in the control room of the Terran Union, no sound in the homes of millions, only the beating of hearts and the memory of the flames. Back in the council chamber, the alien leaders began to move again, speaking in low voices. Some laughed quietly, some seemed troubled, but none spoke of stopping, none spoke of fear. The speaker turned to the assembly and declared the matter closed. The body would be removed, the hall would be cleaned, and tomorrow would bring another day of business as usual. But far beyond their crystal walls in the cold dark of space, the human fleets had already seen enough. They had seen the fire, they had heard the last words, they knew what came next. And every captain, every soldier, every leader carried the same thought: humanity will remember and humanity will respond. In the quiet corners of alien space, where traitors spoke in hushed voices, a few already guessed the truth. They knew that humans were not like other species. Humans did not forget insults. Humans did not simply forgive. They stored it deep, like a slow-burning coal. And when the time was right, they struck with a force that shattered worlds. The council believed the matter finished. They believed the humans too far and too weak to fight back. They believed their act of fire would go unpunished. They believed the galaxy would move on, but they did not yet understand the truth that the death of one human could become the cause of 1,000 wars, that the last words of a dying man could echo louder than any speech in the council chamber. And somewhere deep in human space, engines were already waking up, weapons were being armed, and orders are being given, not in rage, not in chaos, but in cold, unbroken unity. Because when a human is burned alive before the eyes of the galaxy, there is only one answer, and that answer is war. The great cities of Earth were wrapped in a strange stillness, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, the kind that makes the air feel heavier, the kind that makes every sound seem louder than it should be. In the high towers of the United Human Fleet headquarters, long rows of windows looked out over the dark ocean, where huge warships rested in calm waters, their lights glowing faintly like sleeping beasts waiting to wake. Inside the main command chamber, the leaders of humanity stood around a single table, a long table of black metal with a map of the galaxy glowing above it. The faces around the table were hard, and still the eyes of each man and woman locked on the same point, the center of the council world, where the fire had burned their diplomat to ash. No one shouted, no one argued. The air was heavy with a cold unity. There was no need for loud voices, because every person in that room understood the same thing. The choice had already been made. The president of the Terran Union spoke only one sentence, the voice steady and low: the galaxy has chosen war. So be it. The words seemed to echo in the minds of every officer present, as if they were carved into the walls themselves. Messages moved out from the command chamber into every corner of human space, coded orders sent through encrypted channels, ships recalled from distant missions, fleets told to vanish from known patrol routes, soldiers told to prepare without explaining why, but they all knew, they all understood. The image of the flames was burned into their thoughts. Across the homeworld, civilians moved with quiet purpose. Shops closed early, factories switched to wartime production, families stocked shelters in the deep levels of the city's. Children were sent to stay with relatives far from major targets. There were no victory speeches, no promises of quick triumph. There was only work and preparation, every action made in silence, as if the whole world feared to wake the storm too soon. In the great shipyards of Mars, massive engines were tested with deep roars that shook the red dust from their hangars. Entire battalions of mechs walked in slow lines across the metal platforms, their heavy steps echoing against the walls of the cavernous bays. Crews worked without rest, fitting weapons to ships that had not been touched in years, polishing the barrels of railguns, checking the seals on torpedo bays, painting over the old hulls with fresh, dark armor. In the far colonies near the edges of human territory, the change was just as quiet. Mining ships were stripped of cargo bays and turned into makeshift carriers. Deep space fuel stations began to vanish from open trade maps, reappearing as hidden supply points far from known routes. Old outposts that had been abandoned for decades lit up again as soldiers arrived to prepare them for war. The movement was like a shadow across the stars, spreading without noise or warning. Alien spies noticed something, but they could not explain it. They sent hurried reports back to their governments, saying the humans had gone silent, their fleets had disappeared from trade routes, their broadcasts had become fewer and colder. Some aliens believed the humans were afraid, hiding from the Council's power. Others remembered older stories about humanity, stories of wars fought long before they joined the galactic stage, stories that spoke of patience and sudden violence, like a predator that waits for the perfect moment before it strikes. On one alien world, a merchant ship captain sat in a small bar and spoke quietly to a friend, both of them looking around to make sure no one was listening. The captain said, "You remember the last time someone tried to take their homeworld?" The friend nodded. "They burned the sky for 10 years, said the captain, "and when they were done, there was nothing left of the ones who started it." The friend said, "The council thinks it can scare them." The captain shook his head. No one scares them, not for long. Back on Earth, the soldiers of the First Fleet were called to the assembly hall. The hall was a massive dome of steel and glass filled with rows upon rows of uniform from the floor to the high seats. Above, no music played, no banners hung. There was only the hum of the lights above and the sound of boots on the floor. The admiral of the fleet walked to the center and stood without speaking for a long moment. Then the admiral simply said, "You all saw what they did. You know why we are here. We will not rush. We will not shout. We will plan, we will strike when we are ready, and when we strike, they will never forget." The words rolled over the crowd, not like fire, but like ice cold and sharp in the back of every mind. The soldiers stood, without moving, without cheering, because this was not the time for noise, this was the time for focus. In the dark space between the stars, small black ships moved without lights, their hulls coated with a strange material that bent sensors away from them. They were scouts, the eyes of the human fleet slipping into alien space, without leaving a trace, mapping fuel depots, defense networks, and trade lanes. Every detail sent back to command. The scouts moved like ghosts, and no alien patrol ever saw them pass. In the deep war rooms of the Terran Union, generals and admirals studied the maps, marking red lines through enemy space, noting which worlds could be taken quickly and which would be left for later. They argued in low voices over supply chains and fleet timing, but there was no disagreement on the goal. No one suggested waiting. No one suggested mercy. The silence of humanity spread like a cold wind across the galaxy. Alien leaders who had once mocked humans now found themselves speaking more quietly. In meetings, their own civilians asked uneasy questions. Why are the humans so quiet? Why do they not protest? Why do they not send threats? The leaders gave false answers, but deep inside they feared. They already knew the reason. For the families of the soldiers, the waiting was the hardest. Mothers and fathers kissed their children without saying when they would be back. Brothers shook hands, knowing it might be for the last time. There was no illusion here. No one thought the coming war would be short or clean, but every person who wore the uniform knew they would fight until the end, because to do less would be to forget. Hail, and no human would ever forget. In the black sky above Earth, the first warships began to rise from the oceans, their massive shapes breaking the surface with waves that rolled for miles. Water streamed from their armored hulls. As engines roared to life, the sound carried far across the coastlines, a deep, steady thunder that told everyone who heard it that the silence was almost over, that the storm was coming. And somewhere beyond the edge of human space, the last of the scouts sent their final coordinates back to command. The maps were complete, the targets were chosen, and all that remained was the word to begin. The galaxy might still believe the humans were quiet because they feared the council, but soon they would understand the truth. The silence was not fear, the silence was the breath before the strike. Across the galaxy, the news of the human diplomats burning spread like a shadow over every world and every station. It passed from the bright towers of rich trade planets to the dim mining tunnels carved deep into rock. It passed through markets filled with alien voices and through quiet homes where families sat around glowing screens. The image of a human wrapped in fire, the sound of his last words carried across every channel. Some turned away and discussed, some watched in silence, but no one forgot what they saw. On a water world under twin suns, merchants met in a floating cafe, their tables swaying with the waves. They spoke in hushed tones while pretending to drink their sweet blue tea. One said the council went too far. The other whispered they have no idea what they have done. Both looked around to make sure no one was close, for even speaking such things could bring trouble in these times. In the tall glass towers of the council capital, the leaders of the Dravic species gathered in a private room far from the main chamber. Their faces hidden by long robes, they argued in low voices. One asked, "Why did we let them do it?" Another said, "It was not our choice, but now it is our problem." A third leaned close and whispered, "I've seen humans fight. They will not stop until they win." The others fell silent, remembering old rumors from the days before humanity joined the wider galaxy, stories of battles that ended with nothing left but ash and silence. On a small desert moon, a group of young alien soldiers sat in their barracks, the heat pressing down on them. Even the shade, they had all seen the broadcast, they had all heard the humans' words. One soldier said, "Maybe the humans will do nothing, they have few allies." Another shook his head, "No, I heard from my cousin who trades near human space. They are gone from the lanes, they are moving, but not where anyone can see them. That means they are planning." The others looked at him and no one left. The council chambers were not as calm as they had been before. The speaker still stood tall, but the voices of doubt were growing in the corners of the great hall, not in public sessions, but in the quiet halls between meetings. Ambassadors walked with faster steps. Guards looked over their shoulders. More often, some of the smaller member worlds sent secret messages to their own fleets ordering them to prepare for trouble without telling the council why. In the free ports where all species mixed without question, the talk was even louder. Smugglers whispered that human ships were moving in places they should not be seen. Pirates claimed they had spotted dark shapes slipping through asteroid belts with no lights, no markings, and no sound. One old trader swore he had passed a human warship in deep space and did not even see it until it was beside him, and then it was gone before he could speak. Among the council members, some began to regret their vote for the execution. One wealthy trade lord from the Kalari worlds said in private, "They will come for us first." Another laughed and said, "Humans are not that dangerous." The Kalari replied, "Then you have never fought them in the cold void, and you have never seen what they do when one of their own is killed." The laughter faded quickly after that. In hidden corners of alien society, there were those who remembered history before the council's rise. They remembered how humans had fought their own wars, how they had survived on a single planet under skies filled with storms and still reached the stars without help. They remembered that humans had fought until the other side could no longer fight at all, and then kept going to make sure the war would never return. On a mining station at the edge of council space, a group of workers watched old footage of human ships in battle. The screens showed sleek black hulls moving faster than anyone thought possible, railguns firing in perfect rhythm, torpedoes streaking through the void without warning. One miner said quietly, "They're not the biggest fleets, but they're the deadliest." Another miner nodded and said, "They will come, and when they do, I hope we are far from here." Even within the council's own military ranks, there was unease. Some officers respected human discipline and feared what it could do when turned to war. They knew that humans studied every battle, learned every weakness, and never forgot a lesson. Some younger soldiers spoke bravely about crushing them quickly, but the veterans only shook their heads and said, "You have no idea." In the market squares of smaller worlds where news came slowly, the burning of the human diplomats still reached the people. It came as stories told by travelers, as whispers from starship crews, and as shaky recordings traded for a handful of credits. The image of a man standing in fire and speaking his last words traveled farther than the council could control, and those words spread fear not only of the act itself, but of what would come after. On a station orbiting a frozen moon, an old alien who had fought in wars long ago sat with a group of young recruits. He told them, "I once fought beside a human. Their ships were falling apart, their weapons old. But they did not stop, they did not surrender. Even when outnumbered and outgunned, they kept coming. And when we asked them why, they said, because we are human, and we do not stop." The recruits were silent after that. In the highest halls of the council, the speaker called for unity. They spoke of strength and the need to show no weakness. They ordered more ships to patrol near human borders and more spies to gather information. But even as they gave these orders, they could feel the shift in the room. They could feel the cold weight of fear in the eyes of some of their own allies. The council believed the humans were alone without powerful friends in the galaxy, but they did not yet understand that humans did not need allies to be dangerous. They did not understand that sometimes being alone made them even more dangerous, because there was nothing to hold them back. And so the fear in alien worlds grew like a slow tide, rising with every whisper, every rumor, every memory of old battles. It was not loud, it was not quick, but it was steady and unstoppable, the kind of fear that made people look at the stars at night and wonder if somewhere out there human ships were already moving toward them, unseen and unstoppable. Some alien leaders still told themselves it was nothing, that the humans would do nothing, that the fire would fade and the memory would pass. But in the quiet parts of their minds, they knew it was a lie. They knew the humans had already made their choice, and they knew that when humanity came, they would not come to talk, they would come to end it. The night in council space was deep, and still the stars hung like frozen sparks over the black void, and the patrol stations drifted quietly at the edges of important trade lanes on the surface. Everything seemed calm, but in the darkness beyond the reach of their sensors, something moved. At Outpost 7, a Rhineth officer leaned back in his chair, the station lights dim, the hum of machines steady. In his ears, the shift had been uneventful, and he looked forward to the end of his watch. Then a small blip appeared on the edge of the screen, faint, and flickering, he frowned, tapped the display, and scanned again, but the blip was gone, the void was empty. He told himself it was nothing, just debris, and settled back into his seat. 30 seconds later, the station shook with a force that threw him to the floor. The lights went red, alarms screamed, the deck tilted. As explosions roared from the lower levels, the officer pulled himself up and staggered toward the command console. But the screen was dead. Smoke filled the room. The sound of metal tearing apart was all around him. Before he could reach the door, the wall beside him caved inward, and cold black shapes poured through. They moved without a sound, their armor dark as the void, their weapons short and heavy, designed for close quarters. A single flash of light from one of their rifles cut down 2 guards. Before they could even raise their weapons, the officer froze his mind, trying to catch up to what was happening. But then he saw the symbol on their armor, a simple white mark of Earth, and he understood. At Outpost 12 on the far side of Council space, it was much the same. The attack came without warning. One moment the crew was speaking about routine cargo checks, and the next the hull was splitting apart, railgun slugs tearing through the station like paper. Alarms wailed, but there was no time to organize a defense. Human Marines boarded in tight formation, moving with practiced precision, cutting power lines, locking doors behind them, and planting charges before vanishing into the dark again. By the time the Council received the first distress signal, the first 3 outposts were already gone, not damaged, not captured, gone, nothing left but drifting wreckage and empty space. The transmissions that did arrive were short bursts of static, broken shouts, and the word humans repeated again and again before the feed cut to silence. The Speaker of the Council stood before a gathering of military leaders. The air in the chamber was tense. Some demanded an immediate counterstrike. Others warned against rushing in blind. One admiral shouted that it was a coward's attack, the work of ghosts, not warriors. But a quiet ambassador from the Kalari worlds leaned forward and said softly, that is exactly why you should be afraid. Meanwhile, in the cold black void, human fleets moved unseen, their ships coated with light-bending material, their engines running at minimum output, their weapons ready. Every captain knew their orders: hit fast, hit hard, leave nothing behind. Each strike was planned weeks before, each target chosen, not for glory, but for precision. Every blow meant to cut deeper into the Council supply lines. Every attack meant to make the galaxy understand that humanity had begun its war. In the mess halls of smaller Council fleets, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the humans had weapons that could make their ships vanish from sensors. Others said they could shut down systems with a single pulse of energy. Still others claimed they used living soldiers trained to survive in the void without suits for minutes at a time. No one knew which story was true, but all agreed the attacks were real and they were spreading. On a cargo ship bound for the Central Worlds, the crew passed the wreckage of an outpost. The metal twisted and blackened, entire sections missing, as if ripped away by giant claws. They said nothing as they passed, but the silence on the bridge was heavy. Every eye on the viewing glass, watching the debris drift into the darkness. At a Council military briefing, maps showed the spread of attacks. The pattern was not random, but the leaders could not yet see the shape of it. Some worlds had lost communications, others had lost entire fleets in the outer sectors. One commander suggested sending more ships to human borders, but another pointed out that the humans had not struck from their borders. They had come from the heart of Council space, as if they were already there, hiding among the stars. In the war rooms of the Terran Union, the reports from each strike came in quickly, but without celebration. The human commanders marked the targets as complete, then moved to the next stage. There was no cheering, no pride, only the cold knowledge that each blow brought them closer to their goal. The voice of the fleet admiral over comms was calm, as always: proceed to secondary targets, maintain silence, engage only if necessary. On a small moon far from the Central World, a group of alien farmers looked up to see fire falling through the sky. They had no idea that above them in orbit, a Council munitions depot was breaking apart under the impact of precision strikes. The depot exploded in silence, leaving a cloud of fire and metal that burned bright for minutes before fading into nothing. The Council sent messages to all member worlds promising swift action. They called the humans cowards. They said the attacks were desperate acts of a weak species on the edge of defeat. But in private, many leaders began to move their families to safer worlds far from the front lines. Some ordered secret talks with neutral factions, hoping to build escape routes should the war turn against them. On the border of human space, a lone scout ship drifted quietly, its sensors focused on a cluster of Council supply lines. The crew moved with slow, steady hands. Every movement practiced. Their captain listened to the soft beeps of a scanner, then spoke into the comm targets Alpha through Delta send coordinates to Fleet Command, then shut down for dark run. They would wait in silence for the fleet to arrive, knowing the first strike was only the beginning. In the streets of Council capital cities, the common people began to speak in whispers about the humans. Some feared them, others respected them. But all agreed they were not afraid to fight back. The markets filled with strange new items, human trinkets sold as charms for protection, human flags hidden under clothing as silent signs of defiance against the Council's active fire. The speaker stood once more before the Council assembly, declaring that the humans would be crushed, declaring that their attacks would fail. But even as the words rang out in the great chamber, the speaker's eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. The first strike had come and gone, and the humans had not been stopped. The first strike had shown the galaxy that the silence was over and that war had truly begun. The call for surrender came in the dead of night, a single message sent across every Council channel, every frequency, every listening post. The voice was human, steady and cold. It said, "Surrender those responsible for the burning of our diplomat, or we will take everything from you." There was no music, no threat of torture, only the promise of action. In the grand halls of the Council, the message was played again and again. Some leaders shouted in anger, others laughed at the idea that one species could threaten them all. The speaker stood with hands folded, declaring that no member of the Council would bow to such demands. But behind the closed doors of private chambers, some of those same leaders whispered to their advisors, asking how quickly they could move their families to hidden colonies far from the core worlds. The answer from the Council was simple, a broadcast sent back toward human space heavy with mockery and scorn. The speaker's voice rang across the stars, saying humanity has no power to demand anything. Humanity will be taught its place. The message ended with applause from the gathered delegates. But that applause did not last long, because hours later the skies over 3 Council capital worlds filled with shapes black against the light of their suns, human warships in tight formation, their dark armor swallowing the glow, their engines a low thunder that rolled over the cities below. The fleets did not open fire at once. Instead, they moved with slow precision, taking position above power plants, water stations, and food distribution hubs. The civilians looked up in fear as the ships released swarms of small craft that descended toward the surface. In the city of Rhineth Prime, the first explosions came not from weapons, but from carefully placed charges that tore open the main power lines. The lights across the capital flickered and died. Within minutes, the streets were dark, the air systems in the great towers shutting down, leaving thousands to stumble in the shadows. The human ships above sent no further fire. They simply watched as panic spread. On Kalari 2, it was the water plants that went first. Human strike teams landed at the edge of the massive pumping stations, moving in silence and planting timed explosives. The blast sent towers of steam into the sky, and the flow of clean water stopped within hours. The city fountains were dry, the great aqueducts empty, markets closed, and people began to gather in long, desperate lines for what little water remained. On Dravik 4, the attack was different. The humans struck at the main orbital dockyards, not to destroy them completely, but to cut them in half. The great repair bays split and floated away from the main station. Workers trapped inside were rescued by human boarding parties and released unharmed on the surface. But the message was clear: the humans could take any structure they wanted without resistance. In each world, the human forces moved with care. They did not waste ammunition on civilian districts. They did not slaughter without reason. They simply removed the things that kept the cities alive. They left the populations to face the slow pressure of hunger, thirst, and darkness. They were not trying to end the war in one blow. They were breaking the will of the enemy piece by piece. The Council military scrambled to respond. Fleets were called back from distant sectors, convoys rerouted to protect critical worlds. But every movement they made seemed to fall into a human trap. Supply ships vanished in deep space, outposts went silent. Without warning, patrols reported strange sensor echoes, and then nothing. Alien civilians began to question the council openly, something almost unheard of in the core worlds. They asked why the humans could move so easily, why the council had provoked them in the first place, why the fleets could not stop them. The speaker's speeches grew longer and louder, filled with promises of victory, but the faces of the citizens showed less and less belief with each passing day. In the hidden command rooms of the Terran Union, the news of each success came in steady reports. The admirals moved markers across the star maps, closing the circle around key council systems. The human fleets did not stay in one place long enough for a counterattack. They struck, withdrew, and reappeared somewhere else entirely, leaving the enemy chasing shadows. In the asteroid belts near the neutral zones, small human listening posts monitored council communications, intercepting orders and using them to plan the next wave of strikes. The crews in these hidden bases worked in silence, knowing that the less noise they made, the longer they could keep feeding information to the fleets. On a frozen moon at the edge of the war zone, a group of alien mercenaries waited for a transport that would take them away from the conflict. They had been hired by a council world to protect mining sites. But after the human fleets arrived, they saw no reason to fight. They told each other the council had started this, and the humans would finish it. Better to leave now than die in someone else's war. The humans were not fighting for territory. They were fighting for a point to prove. They were fighting to show the galaxy that no one could burn one of their own and expect to walk away untouched. Every ship, every soldier carried that fire inside them, the same fire that had burned in Hale's eyes before the flames took him. That fire was now burning across the stars. In the cities where the humans had struck, the fear began to change shape. At first, it had been fear of attack, fear of death. But now, it was something different, a cold understanding that the humans could strike at will and choose not to kill, that they could destroy what made life possible and leave the people alive to think about why it had happened. The council called for a massive meeting to plan a unified defense, but even as the delegates gathered, news came that another major supply station had been destroyed, this time deep in the inner sectors where the council had believed itself untouchable. The meeting broke in a shouting and accusation, allies blaming each other for weakness, for leaks, for failing to stop the humans. The speaker's voice was drowned out by the chaos. And high above in the dark sky, human fleets began to move again, engines flaring as they prepared for the next phase of war. There was no cheering, no celebration, only the quiet readiness of a species that had made its choice and would see it through to the end. Humanity had lit the fire, and now the galaxy was beginning to understand that it would not go out until the war was done. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a storm of voices, every delegate shouting over the other, translators struggling to keep up the noise so loud that the marble floor seemed to vibrate. The speaker pounded the ancient staff of office against the dais again and again, calling for order, but there was no order left in that place. Reports had arrived in waves over the last hours, each one worse than the last. Human fleets had struck again and again, supply routes severed, defense stations stripped of weapons, entire planetary systems cut off from the core of the council worlds had believed themselves safe behind layers of patrols and watch posts. But now it was clear those layers had been shredded like paper. The first to break were the smaller member states, their representatives speaking in quiet, fearful tones about withdrawing from the war. They did not care about honor or vengeance. They cared about their people, their cities, their survival. They argued that the humans would stop if those who had no part in the burning of the diplomats stepped away from the council. But their words only brought more shouting from the larger powers. The speaker accused them of cowardice, warning that surrendering to human demands would show weakness and invite future attacks. Yet even as the speaker spoke, the hall lights flickered and dimmed, a reminder that power shortages were sweeping the capital world itself. The cause was not enemy fire, but the slow, choking grip of human blockades around key fuel depots far from the center. In the streets outside the chamber, the people of the capital marched in angry crowds. Their banners carried no council colors, only messages of blame and fear. Why should we pay for your war? Why should our children starve for your pride? Why do you think the humans will stop before they reach us? Their voices rose in the shadow of the massive council towers, a sound that echoed up into the debating chamber above. Human intelligence units had worked hard to spread these seeds of unrest across the core world's small packets of truth, hidden in local broadcast stories of council failures, recordings of the burning of Hale, played alongside footage of human rescue teams, saving alien civilians from war zones. The message was clear: the humans struck with precision and with purpose, while the council failed to protect its own. Inside the chamber, a delegate from the water world of Selith stood and demanded to know why their main oceanic processing station had been left undefended 3 days ago. It had been destroyed by a small human task force, and now millions were facing thirst. The council military promised relief ships, but those ships had been lost to another human ambush. A representative from the trade guilds followed, demanding answers about why no convoys were reaching the outer colonies. Without them, entire mining sectors would shut down within weeks, and the council would lose the resources it needed to fight it all. The speaker tried to bring the discussion back to unity, but unity was gone. Some delegations began walking out of the chamber entirely, leaving their seats empty, their planets already preparing to sign their own ceasefire agreements with the humans. Far away in a hidden operations room aboard the human flagship, Admiral Chiron watched these events unfold on intercepted feeds. The alien broadcasts played on several screens, the sight of empty council seats bringing a small, grim smile to her face. She turned to her officers and ordered them to keep pressure on the outer sectors. No full assaults, yet just enough strikes to keep the council guessing and to push their members closer to collapse. The human strategy was simple. They were not trying to win by destroying every fleet or conquering every planet. They were trying to break the mind of the enemy, to make them believe the war could not be won, to turn their own allies against them. And it was working faster than even the most optimistic planners had predicted. Back on the capital world, the speaker's staff scrambled to keep control as more bad news poured in. A key defense station guarding the last safe trade corridor had fallen without a single shot fired. The alien crew had simply abandoned their posts, leaving the station to be claimed by human forces, who then released the crew unharmed and let them carry the story home. This act shocked the council leaders. They could not understand why the humans would give up such a valuable hostage, but the message to the galaxy was sharp, and cutting the humans did not need to kill to win. They could take what they wanted and walk away, leaving their enemy weaker with every move. Rumors began to spread that the humans had already infiltrated the capital itself, that agents were hiding among the alien crowds, ready to strike at the heart of the government. The speaker dismissed these as lies, but fear was a living thing, now moving through every hallway, every street, every whisper in the night. In the refugee camps orbiting the outer stations, thousands of displaced aliens waited for transport that never came. Supply ships delayed or destroyed by human blockades. The faces in those camps were thin and tired children asking why they had no food, mothers staring at empty ration bins, fathers too exhausted to speak. These were the images being broadcast across neutral space, watched by worlds still deciding whether to back the council or stay clear of the war. On the human side, morale was soaring. Every report of another council failure, another empty seat, another abandoned defense post fed the determination of the fleets. The crews worked in silence when needed and cheered in private when the news came in, but there was no celebration in the open, no arrogance. The war was not yet over, and they all knew the council still had teeth. But those teeth were being pulled one by one in the central shipyards where the council's most advanced warships were built. Production had slowed to a crawl, the workers afraid to come in after a series of mysterious explosions destroyed key machinery. No proof linked the humans, but everyone believed they were responsible. The speaker called for emergency powers, hoping to rally the remaining members into one last great strike against humanity. But even this was too late. Half the member worlds refused to send ships, saying their fleets were needed at home. The speaker's words rang hollow in the echoing chamber where so many seats now sat empty. In the cold dark of space beyond the council's borders, the human fleets gathered for the next stage of their plan. The time for slow strangulation was ending soon. The war would enter its final and most dangerous phase, and Admiral Chiron knew the council would either surrender or be forced into a last desperate stand. For now, the humans watched and waited, letting the council tear itself apart from within, knowing that every day of delay, every empty promise from the speaker, every world that walked away from the alliance brought them one step closer to total victory. The human fleet floated in the blackness of deep space, silent and cold like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Each ship, running minimal power lights, dimmed weapons, primed the crews, moved quietly through shadowed corridors, speaking only when needed. Admiral Chiron stood on the bridge of the flagship, eyes fixed on the tactical display, the web of Council defenses shrinking with every passing hour. The collapse had begun days ago, but now the Council was wounded and bleeding, its fleets scattered, its supply lines cut, its people restless and afraid. Chiron knew this was the moment to end it, not with slow attrition, but with a single crushing strike that would tear out the heart of their power. The target was the Council capital, a massive world of shining towers and endless trade lanes, once the center of alien civilization, now a fortress under siege. Human scouts had charted every orbital defense station, every hidden weapon battery, every patrol path. The plan was precise and merciless: hit every critical point at once, overwhelm their command systems, and leave them blind. The order was given in silence, no grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, only a nod from the admiral and a ripple of activity across the fleet. Engines flared to life, carriers launched wings of attack, craft missile pods slid open like the petals of cold metal flowers. The great warships turned toward the heart of the enemy. In the Council chamber, the speaker was in the middle of a desperate speech, urging the last loyal members to stand together. When the alarms began to wail, first came the reports of massive warp signatures at the edge of the system. Then came the news that the outer defense platforms had been destroyed. Within minutes, ships were exploding in blinding flashes of light as human railguns and missiles tore through their hulls. The panic was instant. Delegates shouting over one another, guards rushing into the chamber, communications officers struggling to keep up with the flood of incoming distress calls, whole sectors of the capital falling into silence as power grids failed and command relays went dark. From the viewing windows of the great towers, the people of the capital saw the human fleet appear in the sky, black shapes blotting out the stars, streams of fire lancing down toward the surface. The Council defense ships rushed to meet them, but they were met with a wall of human firepower. Cruisers burned and fell in pieces before they could even close to firing range. In the streets below, the crowds scattered. Some ran for the shelters, others stood frozen, staring at the destruction unfolding above their world. The deep rumble of orbital bombardment shook the ground, dust falling from the ceilings of the shelters and tunnels as explosions lit the distant horizon. Admiral Chiron directed the strike with calm precision, every move calculated, every target chosen to break the enemies. Without wasting effort, the humans did not destroy indiscriminately. Instead, they cut the arteries of the Council's power, severing communications, knocking out shield generators, collapsing the spaceports that might allow reinforcements to land. It was a war of control, not of chaos. Inside the Council's central command bunker, the speaker demanded a full counterattack, but the officers hesitated. Their screens showed the truth: human forces were everywhere, slicing through the last defenses with surgical strikes. Fleets that had once taken pride in their numbers were now nothing but scattered fragments, unable to form a coherent line. The speaker realized too late that the enemy was already here, not just in orbit, but on the surface, as well-dropped ships cut through the skies, leaving trails of fire. Human troops deploying into key government districts with mechanical precision, the sound of their boots and armored vehicles echoing through the capital streets. In the chaos, a small delegation from one of the remaining loyal worlds approached the speaker, quietly suggesting surrender. They argued that the war was lost, that to fight now would only bring more death. The speaker shouted them down, but the words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Back aboard the human flagship, Chiron received word that several Council worlds had already declared neutrality, refusing to send aid to the capital. Some had even opened communications with human envoys, offering to negotiate their own peace deals. This was the breaking point. The chain of loyalty that held the Council together was gone. The final blow came when human marines breached the outer levels of the Council's central tower. The fighting was brief. The defenders, outnumbered and outmatched, the great chamber doors burst open and armed humans stepped inside. Weapons raised. The speaker stood frozen, unable to speak. For the first time in the war, the sound of armored footsteps was the only noise as the lead human officer stepped forward and announced that the council was finished. In that moment, the war was effectively over. There would be no more grand fleets, no more burning of envoys, no more defiant speeches. The galaxy had shifted, and everyone in that chamber knew it. The humans had come not as conquerors, but as a force that could not be ignored or defeated, and the Council's era of dominance had ended in fire and silence. Outside the tower, the people of the capital watched as the human flag was raised over the plaza. Some wept in despair, others simply stood still staring at the symbol of a new order. For some, there was relief, for others rage, but for all there was the understanding that nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Chiron stood on the bridge watching the planet surface through the observation window, the fires of battle slowly fading into the darkness of night. The war had been long and brutal, but it had been one. She gave the order to stand down orbital weapons and prepare relief shipments for the civilian population. There would be no mass punishment, no needless cruelty. The humans had fought to protect their dignity and their people, and now they would show they could lead, not just destroy. In the following days, human aid convoys landed in the capital, bringing food and medicine to the starving streets. Engineers working side by side with alien laborers to restore power and water. The council was gone, but its people remained, and Chiron knew the future of peace would depend on how humanity treated its former enemy. Now that victory was theirs. The galaxy watched as the new balance of power settled. Some feared humanity, others respected them. All remembered the day the council burned a human alive and the war that followed, and all knew this truth: humans were not to be provoked again. And so the war ended not with the total destruction of a world, but with the raising of a flag, the silence of surrender, and the understanding that in the cold vastness of space, humanity had claimed its place among the great powers, not through fear alone, but through resolve, unity, and the unbreakable will to answer fire with fire.